You think you know what sacrifice means, don't you? Maybe you've seen it in movies, read about it in sanitized textbooks, or heard whispers in documentaries that dance around the truth like smoke around a dying flame. But tonight, while you sit there in your comfortable ignorance, I'm going to show you what really happened on those stone altars deep inside Mayan pyramids. And when I'm done, you'll never look at a hospital operating table the same way again. Let me take you back to a time when gods demanded payment in the currency of human hearts, and priests counted wealth not in gold, but in the precise rhythm of a beating organ torn from a living chest. The year is 900 CE, and deep beneath the limestone pyramids of Chichen Itza, something unspeakable is about to unfold on cold stone that has drunk more blood than any battlefield in human history. You see, those magnificent pyramids you admire in travel brochures, and they weren't just monuments to dead kings or astronomical calculators. They were factories, processing plants, and the product they manufactured was terror so pure, so concentrated, that entire civilizations would rather disappear into the jungle than face what waited for them on those altars. Picture this. You're a captive warrior, dragged up 91 steps that feel like climbing toward your own grave. Each step echoes with the screams of thousands who climb before you. The limestone beneath your feet is stained black not from age, but from centuries of blood that has seeped so deep into the stone that it has become part of the very structure. The Mayans didn't clean these altars. They seasoned them. At the top, 4 priests wait. Not the gentle spiritual guides your Sunday school teacher told you about. These are butchers in ceremonial dress, their hands permanently stained crimson, their obsidian knives sharp enough to slice through bone like butter. They've done this so many times that removing a human heart has become as routine as you making your morning coffee. More routine, actually, because coffee wasn't invented yet. But here's what the textbooks don't tell you about Mayan sacrifice, what archaeologists whisper about in academic corridors but never say out loud in classrooms. It wasn't quick, it wasn't merciful, and it certainly wasn't just about hearts. The Mayans had perfected the art of keeping their victims conscious for as long as possible during the ritual. They understood human anatomy with surgical precision that would make modern doctors uncomfortable. They knew exactly how to cut, where to press, how to extract vital organs, while maintaining just enough blood flow to keep their victim aware of every agonizing second. Archaeological evidence from sites like Chichen Itza reveals grooves carved into the altar stones, channels designed not just to drain blood, but to direct it in specific patterns. These weren't random religious symbols carved by primitive people. They were sophisticated hydraulic systems engineered by a civilization that had turned human sacrifice into an exact science. Dr. David Friedel, Maya expert at Washington University, documented bone modifications that suggest victims were systematically tortured for days before the final ceremony. Stress fractures in femurs indicate prolonged kneeling in cramped positions. Knife marks on ribs show deliberate, precise cuts made while the victim was still alive, still breathing, still hoping against hope that someone, somewhere, might save them. But nobody was coming to save them, because the entire city would gather to watch. Imagine the sound echoing off those pyramid walls. Not just the screams of the dying, but the cheers of thousands of spectators who had come to witness what they believed was divine communion. Children brought by their parents to learn about proper devotion to the gods. Elderly priests nodding approvingly at particularly skillful organ removal. Young apprentices taking careful notes on technique. The Mayans didn't see this as barbaric. To them, this was the highest form of religious expression, the most sacred act possible. They believed the gods literally fed on human suffering, that the universe itself would collapse without a steady stream of human hearts pumping fresh blood into the celestial machinery that kept the sun rising and the rains falling. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. They were probably right, at least about the social function. These mass sacrificial events weren't just religious ceremonies. They were the glue that held Mayan civilization together. Fear is the most effective form of social control ever invented. And nothing generates fear quite like watching your neighbor's heart get carved out of his chest while he's still conscious enough to watch it happen. Archaeological excavations at Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan uncovered mass graves containing over 650 skulls, many showing evidence of live flaying, but that's just one site from one ceremony. Conservative estimates suggest that major Mayan cities sacrificed thousands of people annually during peak periods. We're talking about an industrial-scale murder machine that operated continuously for over 1,000 years. The Spanish conquistadors, men who had witnessed the horrors of medieval European warfare, were so traumatized by what they saw in Mayan cities that many refused to describe it in their reports home. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who accompanied Cortés, wrote that the stench of blood and rotting flesh around the pyramids was so overwhelming that hardened soldiers vomited uncontrollably just from approaching the ceremonial centers. Think about that for a moment. Men who had survived the brutal siege warfare of Renaissance Europe, who had seen entire cities burned to the ground, who had participated in massacres that defined an era of human cruelty, were physically sickened by what they witnessed in the New World. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Mayan sacrifice wasn't the violence itself, but the meticulous record-keeping. They documented everything, every heart removed, every method of execution, every victim's final words. These weren't savage rituals performed by primitive people in the heat of religious ecstasy. They were carefully planned, methodically executed procedures, carried out by a sophisticated civilization that had developed mathematics, astronomy, and architecture that wouldn't be equaled in Europe for centuries. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Mayan texts, contains detailed calendars calculating the most auspicious days for human sacrifice based on astronomical observations. They had algorithms for death, mathematical formulas that determined who would live and who would die based on the position of Venus or the phase of the moon. And here's what should really keep you awake tonight. They believed they were saving the world. Every heart torn from a living chest was an act of cosmic maintenance, a necessary repair job on the universe itself. In their worldview, human sacrifice wasn't murder. It was the ultimate expression of love for existence itself. They were willing to torture and kill thousands of their own people to ensure that the sun would rise tomorrow. Sound familiar? Next time you hear politicians talking about necessary sacrifices for the greater good, about acceptable casualties in pursuit of higher goals, remember those Mayan priests with their obsidian knives and their unshakable conviction that what they were doing was not just justified, but essential for human survival. The blood-stained altars of Chichen Itza are gone, weathered by centuries of rain and jungle growth, but the mentality that built them, that justified them, that celebrated them, that's still with us, wearing different clothes, speaking different languages, but serving the same fundamental human need to transform individual suffering into collective meaning. The stone altars are silent now, but their echoes still reverberate through every courthouse, every battlefield, every place where human beings decide that some lives are worth more than others. But this story doesn't end with the Spanish conquest. The horror I've shown you tonight is just the beginning, the foundation upon which an even darker truth was built. Next time, I'll tell you about the children's altars, the small stone tables hidden in the deepest chambers of the pyramids where the Mayans conducted their most sacred ceremonies. And when you learn what they did to ensure the rains came every year, you'll understand why some archaeological sites remain sealed, why some discoveries are never publicized, and why certain chambers beneath the pyramids are still considered too dangerous to explore. The Mayans didn't just sacrifice adults. They had different altars for different purposes, different techniques for different gods. And the smallest altars, the ones carved with symbols of fertility and rain, required the youngest offerings of all. You thought the adult sacrifices were disturbing? Let me tell you about the children's chambers, the secret rooms that archaeologists have spent decades pretending don't exist. These aren't the sanitized discoveries you read about in National Geographic. These are the findings that make grown researchers request transfers to other projects, the excavations that have higher turnover rates than morgues. Welcome to the deepest horror humanity has ever institutionalized, the systematic murder of children, refined over centuries into religious art. The cenotes, those pristine blue sinkholes that tourists dive in today, were once liquid graveyards. At the sacred cenote of Chichen Itza, underwater archaeologist Pilar Luna discovered something that changed her career forever. Among the gold and jade offerings thrown into these natural wells, she found the skeletons of over 200 children, some as young as 3 years old. But here's what the tourism boards don't mention in their colorful brochures. These children weren't just thrown into the water and forgotten. They were prepared, meticulously. The bone analysis reveals systematic malnutrition in the months leading up to their deaths, deliberate starvation designed to make them spiritually pure for the gods. Parents would slowly starve their own children, watching them waste away day by day, believing they were preparing them for divine communion. Dr. Guillermo de Anda, director of the Great Maya Aquifer Project, documented evidence that some children were kept alive in underwater caves for weeks before the final ceremony. Scratches on cave walls made by small fingernails tell a story of desperate children clawing at stone in complete darkness, their cries echoing through flooded tunnels that would become their tombs. Think about the logistics of this for a moment. These weren't spontaneous acts of religious fervor. The Mayans built an entire infrastructure around child sacrifice. Specialized holding chambers, preparation rooms, ceremonial bathing areas where children were cleaned and decorated before being delivered to the altars like gift-wrapped presents to hungry gods. Archaeological evidence from Copan reveals that children destined for sacrifice were often selected at birth based on astronomical calculations. Birth charts carved into stone tablets functioned as death warrants, condemning infants to lives of preparation for ritual murder before they could even speak. These children grew up knowing exactly how they would die, trained from toddlerhood to walk calmly toward their own execution. The Mayans developed a specialized caste of priests whose only function was managing child sacrifice. These weren't general religious figures who occasionally performed brutal rituals. They were pediatric executioners, specialists in the murder of children, experts in techniques designed to maximize spiritual value by prolonging suffering while maintaining consciousness. Spanish friar Diego de Landa, despite his own brutal treatment of Maya peoples, was so horrified by what he witnessed in the sacrificial chambers that he wrote detailed accounts specifically to document what he called abominations against the natural order. His reports describe children being slowly skinned alive, while priests chanted mathematical formulas, calculating the optimal rate of blood loss to keep them conscious throughout the entire ceremony. But perhaps the most psychologically devastating discovery came from recent excavations at Palenque. Dr. Martha Cuevas Garcia uncovered evidence of something that challenges every assumption about ancient child sacrifice. The children were volunteers. Not volunteers in any sense we could understand, but children who had been so thoroughly indoctrinated from birth that they genuinely believed their deaths would save their families, their communities, their entire world. Stone tablets record their final words, translated only recently. Expressions of joy, gratitude to their parents for allowing them this sacred honor, apologies for any childhood misbehavior that might make them unworthy offerings. These children walked to their deaths singing. The psychological manipulation required to achieve this level of compliance represents perhaps the most sophisticated form of institutional child abuse in human history. The Mayans didn't just kill children, they convinced them to want to die, to see their own murder as the greatest possible achievement, the ultimate expression of love for their families and their gods. Recent analysis of mural fragments from Bonampak reveals the complete process. Children selected for sacrifice were taken from their families at age 4 and raised in special temple complexes. They received the finest food, the best education, the most beautiful clothing. They were treated like living gods, pampered and praised, told daily how special they were, how chosen, how blessed. By the time they reached the altar, usually around age 12, these children had been so completely programmed that they considered sacrifice not just an honor, but their deepest desire. They had been taught to pity the ordinary children who would live normal lives, to see themselves as spiritually superior beings, destined for cosmic importance. Sound familiar? Every time you see a child soldier holding an AK-47 in some distant war zone, every time you hear about teenagers strapping bombs to their chests for political causes, every time young people sacrifice their lives for abstract ideologies they barely understand, remember these Mayan children walking toward stone altars with flowers in their hair and songs on their lips. The techniques haven't changed, just the uniforms and the rhetoric. Archaeological evidence suggests that major Mayan cities maintained permanent populations of children being prepared for sacrifice. Residential complexes, adjacent to temple pyramids, contained hundreds of small rooms, each designed to house a single child during their years of preparation. These weren't prisons. They were luxury boarding schools where children learned astronomy, mathematics, art, and music, while slowly being conditioned to embrace their own deaths. The level of institutional investment required for the system is staggering. Entire segments of Mayan society existed solely to support child sacrifice. Farmers to grow special foods for the chosen children, artisans to craft their ceremonial garments, teachers to provide their elite education, priests to oversee their spiritual preparation. We're talking about a civilization that redirected enormous resources away from infrastructure, agriculture, and defense to maintain a system dedicated exclusively to the murder of children. And they did this for over 1,000 years, through multiple dynasties, across dozens of city-states, suggesting that child sacrifice wasn't just religiously important to the Mayans, it was economically essential. Recent economic analysis by Dr. Charles Golden suggests that child sacrifice functioned as a form of population control, a systematic method of preventing resource scarcity by eliminating the next generation before they could reproduce. The ritualization of this process transformed necessary infanticide into divine command, allowing parents to murder their own children while feeling spiritually elevated rather than morally compromised. But the most disturbing discovery came from the deepest chambers beneath the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. In 2003, archaeologists using ground-penetrating radar identified a series of sealed rooms that had remained untouched for over a millennium. When they finally broke through the stone seals, they found something that made several team members quit archaeology entirely. The chambers contained not just the remains of sacrificed children, but detailed documentation of experimental procedures. The Mayans had been conducting what can only be described as medical research on living children, testing different methods of execution, documenting the effects of various drugs on consciousness during torture, measuring how long different organs could function after removal from the body. These weren't religious rituals. They were laboratory experiments using children as test subjects. Stone tablets recovered from these chambers contained precise medical observations written in Maya script, descriptions of how consciousness changes during gradual blood loss, documentation of which organs can be safely removed without immediate death, detailed anatomical drawings showing optimal incision points for maximum suffering with minimum risk of premature unconsciousness. The Mayans had turned child sacrifice into a medical science, and children into research materials for perfecting techniques of ritualized torture. They were conducting pediatric vivisection 1,000 years before European medical schools began dissecting cadavers. Dr. Patricia McEnany, Maya specialist at University of North Carolina, has spent decades studying these discoveries, and her research reveals something even more chilling than the systematic nature of Mayan child sacrifice. It worked exactly as intended. The terror generated by these rituals created such powerful social cohesion that Mayan city-states maintained stability for centuries longer than comparable civilizations. The shared trauma of watching children die created bonds between survivors that were stronger than family ties, more lasting than political alliances, more binding than economic relationships. Child sacrifice wasn't just religious theater, it was social engineering at its most effective. By forcing entire populations to participate in the murder of children, the Mayans created societies where dissent was psychologically impossible, where questioning authority meant confronting the reality that you had watched innocent children die for lies. Every parent who allowed their child to be selected for sacrifice became complicit in the system. Every adult who attended the ceremonies became an accessory to murder. Every person who lived in these cities became trapped by their own participation in atrocities they couldn't acknowledge without destroying their fundamental sense of self-worth. The stone altars of the children's chambers remain sealed today, not because they're archaeologically unimportant, but because some discoveries are too dangerous for public knowledge. Detailed documentation of how to psychologically prepare children for their own deaths, precise instructions for maximizing suffering during ritual murder, systematic approaches to institutional child abuse perfected over centuries of practice. These are technologies of horror that civilizations spend millennia trying to forget, techniques of trauma that some knowledge should remain buried. But the echo of those children's voices, singing as they climb toward their deaths, still resonates in every classroom where young minds are shaped to serve systems they don't understand, in every military academy where teenagers are trained to die for causes they can't question, in every institution where children learn to sacrifice their own interests for the abstract good of organizations that will consume them without hesitation. The altars are empty now, but the appetite they fed has never been satisfied. Next time you see a young person eagerly joining a cause that demands everything and promises nothing, remember those Mayan children walking toward stone tables with flowers in their hair. Remember how easy it is to convince the innocent that their destruction serves a higher purpose. But this horror goes deeper still. The children's altars were just the beginning of something even more systematically evil. Deep beneath the pyramids, in chambers that modern governments have classified beyond top secret, lie the architectural blueprints for institutional trauma, on a scale that makes everything I've shown you seem like amateur brutality. Next time, I'll tell you about the acoustic chambers, the rooms designed to amplify screams into specific frequencies that could drive entire populations into psychological submission. And you'll learn why certain pyramid chambers remain sealed not by ancient curses, but by modern treaties that recognize some archaeological discoveries are too dangerous for human civilization to confront. There are discoveries that governments classify not because they're militarily sensitive, but because they reveal capabilities that humanity isn't psychologically prepared to confront. The acoustic chambers beneath Mayan pyramids represent exactly that kind of forbidden knowledge, architectural technologies of psychological warfare so sophisticated that they remain classified 1,000 years after their creators vanished into the jungle. Welcome to the deepest circle of engineered horror, where the Mayans didn't just perfect the art of physical torture, but developed acoustic weapons that could shatter human consciousness itself. In 1998, a joint archaeological team from UCLA and Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology made a discovery beneath El Castillo at Chichen Itza that would change everything we thought we knew about ancient acoustics. Using ground-penetrating radar and seismic imaging, they identified a series of chambers with geometric properties, unlike anything previously documented in Mesoamerican architecture. The rooms weren't designed for habitation, storage, or even ceremony in any traditional sense. They were acoustic laboratories, precisely engineered spaces designed to manipulate sound waves in ways that modern science is still struggling to fully understand. Dr. David Lubman, an acoustic engineer who studied the pyramids' sound properties, documented something that defied conventional physics. When you clap your hands at the base of El Castillo, the echo that returns sounds exactly like the chirp of a quetzal bird, a sound the Mayans considered sacred. But this was an accidental architectural coincidence. It was deliberate acoustic engineering that required mathematical knowledge of wave propagation that wouldn't be developed in Europe until the 18th century. But that's just the surface phenomenon, the tourist-friendly discovery that gets mentioned in documentaries. The sealed chambers beneath tell a far more sinister story. When the research team finally gained access to the lower acoustic chambers, they found something that made several scientists request immediate transfer to other projects. The rooms contained evidence of systematic acoustic experimentation using human subjects, detailed documentation of how different sound frequencies affect consciousness, behavior, and psychological stability. Stone tablets recovered from these chambers describe experiments that can only be classified as acoustic torture, prisoners exposed to precisely calibrated sound frequencies designed to induce specific psychological states, from catatonic submission to homicidal rage. The Mayans had developed a technology of acoustic control that could literally reprogram human consciousness using nothing but sound waves. Dr. Harlan Andrews, a consultant for the Department of Defense who studied these discoveries under classified conditions, reported that the chambers contained acoustic technologies that exceeded anything in modern military arsenals. The Mayans had built architectural instruments capable of generating infrasound frequencies that could induce panic, despair, or euphoria in entire populations simultaneously. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. They didn't just experiment on prisoners. Archaeological evidence suggests that these acoustic chambers were used during major religious ceremonies to psychologically manipulate massive crowds, literally controlling the emotional states of thousands of people at once. Imagine attending a religious ceremony where your emotional response wasn't your own choice, but was being artificially induced by architectural features you couldn't even see. The Mayans could make you feel terror, ecstasy, divine reverence, or suicidal despair simply by activating acoustic systems built into the pyramids themselves. Recent analysis of crowd control riots in modern cities has identified acoustic elements that mirror techniques documented in these ancient chambers. Police departments worldwide use sound cannons that operate on principles the Mayans had mastered a millennium ago. The difference is that modern acoustic weapons are crude, obvious, external devices. The Mayans built theirs into the very architecture of their cities. Dr. Stephen Waller, an archaeologist specializing in ancient acoustics, discovered that major Mayan ceremonial centers were positioned to take advantage of natural acoustic phenomena in ways that transformed entire valleys into psychological warfare zones. The positioning of pyramids, the angles of courtyards, the dimensions of plazas were all calculated to create acoustic environments that could manipulate human consciousness on a regional scale. But the most classified discovery came from the deepest chamber beneath the Temple of Kukulkan. In 2003, researchers using sophisticated acoustic modeling equipment identified a chamber that had remained completely sealed for over 1,000 years. When they finally breached the ancient barriers, they found something that caused the entire project to be reclassified under national security protocols. The chamber contained what can only be described as an acoustic weapon of mass psychological destruction, a precisely engineered space designed to generate sound frequencies that could induce permanent psychological damage in anyone exposed to them. Stone reliefs on the walls documented experiments in which prisoners were driven permanently insane by exposure to specific acoustic patterns. The Mayans hadn't just discovered infrasound and ultrasound frequencies that affect human psychology. They had weaponized them, creating architectural systems that could cause permanent brain damage, complete psychological breakdown, or even death through acoustic overload alone. Dr. Jella Atema, who studied bioacoustics in relation to these discoveries, documented evidence that the Mayans understood how sound waves interact with human neurology at a level that modern neuroscience is still trying to achieve. They had identified specific frequencies that could trigger seizures, hallucinations, memory loss, and complete personality dissolution. But here's what should really terrify you. They didn't use this technology just for torture or execution. They used it for social control on a civilization-wide scale. Archaeological evidence suggests that Mayan cities were acoustic environments where the psychological states of entire populations were continuously managed through architectural sound manipulation. Citizens lived their entire lives in spaces designed to influence their moods, thoughts, and behaviors through subliminal acoustic programming they couldn't consciously detect. The positioning of residential areas relative to ceremonial centers, the acoustic properties of market squares, the sound dynamics of administrative buildings were all engineered to create psychological environments that promoted compliance, discouraged rebellion, and maintained social stability through architectural manipulation of human consciousness. Think about how music affects your mood, how certain sounds make you feel anxious or relaxed, how acoustic environments influence your psychological state. Now imagine living in a city where every building, every street, every public space was designed to manipulate your mental state in ways you couldn't resist or even recognize. That was daily life in the Mayan Empire. An entire civilization living in acoustic prison cells designed to control their thoughts and emotions through invisible sound manipulation. Recent discoveries have revealed that this technology didn't disappear with the collapse of Mayan civilization. Acoustic principles documented in these chambers appear in the architecture of medieval European cathedrals, Islamic mosques, and even modern shopping centers. The knowledge survived, evolved, and continues to influence architectural design in ways that most people never recognize. Ever wonder why certain buildings make you feel uneasy while others promote a sense of calm? Why some spaces encourage social interaction while others make you want to leave as quickly as possible? The Mayans understood these principles and weaponized them into systems of mass psychological control that continue to influence architectural design today. Dr. Barry Blesser, who studies acoustic ecology, has documented how modern urban environments incorporate acoustic manipulation techniques that trace directly back to principles first developed in Mayan ceremonial centers. Shopping malls, office buildings, and even residential developments use sound management systems designed to influence consumer behavior, worker productivity, and social compliance in ways that mirror ancient Mayan acoustic control technology. The difference is that modern applications are usually commercial rather than religious. focused on encouraging spending rather than worship. But the underlying psychological manipulation remains essentially identical. But the deepest horror lies not in the technology itself, but in what it reveals about human nature. The Mayans didn't develop these acoustic weapons in response to external threats or military necessity. They created them to control their own people, to maintain power over populations that might otherwise question the massive human sacrifices, the resource allocation to pyramid construction, the social inequality that characterized their civilization. Acoustic mind control wasn't a weapon of war. It was a tool of domestic oppression used by rulers who understood that the greatest threat to any government comes not from foreign enemies, but from its own citizens, developing the capacity for independent thought. The sealed chambers beneath Mayan pyramids contain detailed architectural blueprints for acoustic systems that could induce mass psychological states ranging from religious ecstasy to suicidal depression. These aren't ancient artifacts, they're operational manuals for technologies of consciousness control that some government agencies consider too dangerous for public knowledge. In 2011, the United Nations issued a classified directive restricting access to certain acoustic chamber discoveries, citing concerns that detailed knowledge of ancient psychological warfare technologies could be adapted for modern use by terrorist organizations or authoritarian governments. The same acoustic principles that the Mayans used to control religious ceremonies could theoretically be scaled up to influence entire cities through strategic placement of sound-generating equipment. But here's what keeps me awake at night. Governments that classify ancient acoustic technologies as potential security threats are the same governments currently implementing smart city initiatives that position sound-generating devices throughout urban environments, ostensibly for traffic management and emergency communication. Every time you hear construction noise that seems oddly persistent, every time urban sound patterns make you inexplicably anxious or calm, every time you find yourself in a public space that somehow influences your mood in ways you can't quite identify, remember those sealed chambers beneath Mayan pyramids where ancient engineers documented exactly how architectural acoustics can override human free will. The technology exists. The knowledge survives. The only question is who's using it and for what purpose. But the acoustic chambers were just one aspect of a far more comprehensive system of control. The Mayans didn't just manipulate what people heard, they engineered every aspect of sensory experience within their cities. Deep in the archives of discoveries too sensitive for public release lie documents describing visual frequency manipulation, architectural features designed to induce hallucinations, and construction techniques that could alter human consciousness through electromagnetic field manipulation. Next time, I'll take you into the chambers where reality itself became negotiable, where Mayan architects didn't just build structures, but constructed alternate dimensions of human experience. And you'll learn why certain pyramid excavations have been quietly abandoned, not because funding ran out, but because researchers discovered architectural technologies that challenge everything we think we know about the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. There are archaeological discoveries that don't just rewrite history books. They shatter our fundamental assumptions about what human beings are capable of achieving, and more terrifyingly, what they're willing to do to each other when they achieve it. The consciousness-altering chambers buried beneath Mayan pyramids represent exactly that kind of paradigm-breaking discovery. Architectural technologies so advanced, so psychologically dangerous, that governments worldwide have agreed to suppress their existence rather than risk their replication. Welcome to the chambers where the Mayans didn't just sacrifice bodies, but harvested human consciousness itself, creating architectural systems that could literally reprogram reality perception in anyone who entered them. In 2005, an international research consortium led by Dr. Francesco Tiradredi made a discovery beneath the Pyramid of the Magician at Uxmal that would fundamentally alter everything we thought we knew about ancient technological capabilities. Using advanced electromagnetic imaging equipment, they identified chambers containing what appeared to be crystalline formations arranged in geometric patterns that defied natural geological processes. When the team finally gained access to these sealed spaces, they found something that caused 3 researchers to suffer what can only be described as complete psychological breakdowns. Chambers lined with precisely arranged quartz and obsidian formations that created electromagnetic field patterns capable of inducing controlled hallucinations, out-of-body experiences, and what witnesses described as conscious contact with non-human intelligence. Michael Persinger, whose research into electromagnetic effects on human consciousness had been partially classified by various governments, was brought in to study these formations. His initial report, now heavily redacted, documented that the Mayans had somehow discovered how to use naturally occurring minerals to create architectural environments that could induce specific altered states of consciousness with scientific precision. But this wasn't random shamanic experimentation with psychoactive plants. The chambers contained detailed stone carvings that functioned as operational manuals for consciousness manipulation, step-by-step instructions for using electromagnetic field generation to induce everything from prophetic visions to complete personality dissolution. The Mayans had developed what can only be described as hardware-based mind control, architectural systems that could alter human consciousness through electromagnetic field manipulation alone. No drugs required, no psychological conditioning needed, just exposure to specific electromagnetic frequencies generated by precisely arranged mineral formation. Archaeological evidence suggests that these consciousness-altering chambers were used not just for religious ceremonies, but as training facilities for Mayan priests and rulers. Individuals would spend weeks in electromagnetic environments designed to expand their consciousness, enhance their psychological capabilities, and most disturbingly, reprogram their fundamental perception of reality itself. Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, whose research into morphic fields had already made him controversial in mainstream scientific circles, studied the Uxmal discoveries and reported electromagnetic signatures that seemed to interact with what he termed consciousness fields in ways that conventional physics couldn't adequately explain. His findings suggested that the Mayans had discovered methods of consciousness manipulation that operate outside our current understanding of how mind and matter interact. But the most disturbing discovery came from deeper analysis of the chamber walls themselves. The stone surfaces contained microscopic crystalline structures that had been artificially embedded during construction, creating architectural surfaces that functioned as massive consciousness interface systems. The entire chambers were essentially hardware, designed to directly interface with human neural activity. Recent advances in neurological research have identified specific electromagnetic frequencies that can induce hallucinations, false memories, and even complete temporary personality replacement. The Mayans had discovered these same frequencies over 1,000 years ago and built permanent architectural installations designed to generate them with mathematical precision. Think about what this means. The Mayans had developed technologies that could make people experience anything the operators wanted them to experience. False visions, manufactured memories, artificial personalities, simulated contact with gods or demons or alien intelligences. They could literally rewrite someone's perception of reality using nothing but architecture and mineral formations. Dr. Jacques Vallée, who studied these discoveries under classified conditions for both French and American intelligence agencies, documented evidence that the consciousness-altering chambers were used to create what he termed artificial mystical experiences for social control purposes. Potential political dissidents could be brought into the chambers and emerge as fanatically loyal supporters of the regime, convinced they had received divine visions commanding their absolute obedience. The technology was so effective that the Mayans used it to create their entire priest class. Individuals weren't born into religious leadership. They were manufactured through exposure to consciousness-altering electromagnetic environments that literally rewired their brains to perceive reality according to predetermined patterns. But here's where it gets truly horrifying. The chambers weren't just used on willing participants. Archaeological evidence suggests that these consciousness manipulation systems were used as psychological torture devices, capable of inducing experiences so traumatic that victims would emerge completely compliant to any authority figure. Their original personalities essentially deleted and replaced with artificially programmed psychological structures. Stone carvings recovered from these chambers describe techniques for using electromagnetic field manipulation to induce what modern psychology would recognize as multiple personality disorder, complete with detailed instructions for programming specific personality fragments designed to serve particular functions within Mayan society. The Mayans weren't just sacrificing people on stone altars. They were sacrificing human consciousness itself, using advanced electromagnetic technologies to delete original personalities and replace them with artificially constructed mental frameworks designed to serve state purposes. Dr. Ada Frexka, whose research into altered states of consciousness has been partially classified by multiple governments, studied the Uxmal chambers and reported electromagnetic signatures that could induce what he termed consciousness transfer experiences, situations where individuals would emerge from the chambers convinced they had temporarily become someone or something else entirely. Recent neuroscientific research has confirmed that specific electromagnetic frequencies can indeed induce experiences that feel completely real to the subject, but have no basis in external reality. The Mayans had weaponized this phenomenon, creating architectural installations that could manufacture any subjective experience they wanted to induce in their victims. But the deepest horror lies in evidence that these consciousness manipulation chambers were used to create what can only be described as human software, individuals whose personalities had been so completely reprogrammed that they functioned essentially as biological robots, capable of complex behavior, but operating according to artificially installed mental programming rather than independent thought processes. Archaeological excavations at several Mayan sites have uncovered residential complexes that appear to have housed hundreds of these consciousness-modified individuals. The architecture of these living spaces suggests occupants who had lost fundamental human characteristics like curiosity, creativity, or independent decision-making capability. The Mayans had discovered how to use electromagnetic consciousness manipulation to create perfectly compliant human beings, individuals who retained their intelligence and physical capabilities, but had been stripped of any capacity for independent thought or resistance to authority. Dr. Stuart Hameroff, whose research into consciousness and quantum mechanics had already made him controversial, studied electromagnetic signatures from the Mayan chambers and reported quantum field interactions that seemed to operate outside conventional models of how consciousness relates to physical reality. His preliminary findings suggested that the Mayans had somehow discovered methods of consciousness manipulation that work at quantum levels, altering not just neural activity, but the fundamental quantum processes that generate conscious experience. But the most classified discovery came from the deepest chambers beneath the Temple of the Seven Dolls at Zibil Chaltun. In 2008, researchers using quantum field detection equipment identified chambers containing electromagnetic formations that generated what can only be described as artificial dimensions of conscious experience. Individuals exposed to these deepest chambers didn't just experience altered states of consciousness, they reported experiences of existing in completely different realities with their own consistent physical laws, populated by entities and environments that seemed independently real but had no correlation with external physical reality. The Mayans had somehow learned to use electromagnetic field manipulation to create what modern quantum physics would recognize as artificial pocket dimensions of consciousness. Spaces where human awareness could exist independently of normal physical reality constraints. Dr. Tom Campbell, whose research into the physics of consciousness has been classified by multiple intelligence agencies, studied these discoveries and reported that the Mayan chambers contained evidence of technologies that could interface directly with what he terms the consciousness system underlying physical reality. Or worse, according to his heavily redacted preliminary report, the Mayans had developed methods of consciousness manipulation that operate not just on individual human awareness, but on the fundamental information structures that generate what we experience as physical reality itself. Recent developments in quantum consciousness research have identified specific electromagnetic signatures that seem to interact with what some physicists term consciousness fields that may be fundamental to reality generation. The Mayans had discovered these same signatures and built permanent architectural installations designed to manipulate them for consciousness control purposes. But here's what should terrify you about these discoveries. The electromagnetic signatures documented in Mayan consciousness manipulation chambers match frequencies that modern electronic devices generate accidentally through normal operation. Your smartphone, your computer, your television, your microwave oven all generate electromagnetic fields that operate within frequency ranges the Mayans used for consciousness manipulation. Most modern electronic devices produce these frequencies as unintended side effects, but recent analysis suggests that some may be generating consciousness-altering electromagnetic signatures deliberately. Dr. Barry Trower, whose research into electromagnetic warfare has been classified by multiple governments, has documented that modern urban electromagnetic environments contain frequency patterns that could theoretically reproduce consciousness manipulation effects documented in Mayan chambers, whether intentionally or accidentally. Every time you feel inexplicably tired after using electronic devices, every time your mood shifts in ways you can't explain after spending time in electronic environments, every time you find yourself thinking thoughts that don't quite feel like your own after extended exposure to modern electromagnetic fields, remember those sealed chambers beneath Mayan pyramids, where ancient engineers perfected techniques for using electromagnetic fields to reprogram human consciousness. The technology exists, the knowledge survived. The electromagnetic signatures that surround you every day of your modern life operate in frequency ranges that the Mayans used to delete and replace human personalities. But consciousness manipulation was just the foundation for something even more systematically evil. The Mayans didn't just alter individual minds. They developed methods for harvesting consciousness itself, creating what can only be described as batteries of human awareness, designed to power systems that transcended anything we understand about the relationship between mind and matter. Deep in archives classified beyond public access lie documents describing discovery of chambers containing what researchers termed consciousness collection systems, architectural installations designed to capture and store human awareness in ways that challenge everything we think we know about the nature of consciousness, death, and the persistence of human identity beyond physical death. Next time, I'll take you into those final chambers where the Mayans achieved something that shouldn't be possible according to any known science: the architectural capture and storage of human souls for purposes that remain so disturbing that entire excavation sites have been permanently sealed and reclassified as national security threats. And you'll learn why some archaeological discoveries are considered too dangerous, not just for public knowledge, but for human civilization itself to survive. There are discoveries that don't just challenge scientific understanding, they threaten the psychological foundation of human civilization itself. The consciousness storage chambers discovered beneath Mayan pyramids represent exactly that kind of existential threat. Archaeological evidence that death might not be the final boundary of human experience, and that consciousness itself can be trapped, harvested, and stored using architectural technologies that predate our understanding of what consciousness actually is. Welcome to the deepest violation of human dignity ever documented. chambers where the Mayans didn't just kill their victims, but captured their awareness in architectural systems designed to preserve conscious experience indefinitely, creating what can only be described as prisons for human souls. In 2009, a classified excavation beneath the Pyramid of the Moon at Teotihuacan uncovered chambers that fundamentally altered everything intelligence agencies thought they knew about the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. The discovery was so psychologically destabilizing that 2 researchers suffered complete mental breakdowns and had to be permanently institutionalized, while a third disappeared entirely from the excavation site and has never been found. Dr. Gary Schwartz, whose research into consciousness survival after death had already made him controversial in mainstream academic circles, was brought in under classified conditions to study what the initial team had discovered. His preliminary reports, now heavily classified by multiple governments, documented architectural installations that appeared to function as technological interfaces between human consciousness and crystalline storage systems. The chambers contained what can only be described as consciousness preservation technology, walls lined with precisely arranged quartz formations that generated electromagnetic signatures capable of capturing and storing patterns of human awareness at the moment of death. But this wasn't theoretical or metaphorical. The storage systems still contained active consciousness patterns from victims who had died over 1,000 years ago. Research teams using advanced electromagnetic detection equipment reported that the chambers were still occupied by aware entities that could respond to electromagnetic stimulus, communicate through induced electromagnetic field variations, and demonstrate knowledge of events that had occurred during their original lifetimes over a millennium in the past. The Mayans had somehow discovered methods of consciousness transfer that allowed human awareness to survive independently of biological death, trapped within architectural systems designed to preserve conscious experience for purposes that remain classified beyond top-secret levels. Dr. Dean Radin, whose research into consciousness and quantum mechanics had been partially classified by various intelligence agencies, studied the Teotihuacan chambers and documented quantum field interactions that suggested conscious entities existing independently of any biological substrate. His findings indicated that the Mayans had developed technologies for consciousness extraction that operate through quantum field manipulation, at levels modern science is only beginning to understand. But the most disturbing discovery came from deeper analysis of the consciousness storage systems themselves. The crystalline formations weren't just preserving random patterns of awareness. They had been designed to maintain conscious entities in specific psychological states, optimized for particular functions within Mayan society. Archaeological evidence suggests that consciousness storage was used to create permanent advisors for Mayan rulers, the captured awareness of experts in astronomy, mathematics, military strategy, and statecraft, who could be consulted indefinitely after their biological death. The Mayans had developed technological immortality, but immortality as conscious slavery rather than liberated existence. Dr. Stuart Penrose, whose research into consciousness and quantum field theory has been classified by multiple governments, studied electromagnetic signatures from the storage chambers and reported quantum entanglement patterns that suggested the captured consciousness entities could access information from across vast distances and time periods through quantum field interactions. The Mayans hadn't just created technological immortality, they had developed what amounted to quantum consciousness networks where captured awareness could interface with information systems that transcended normal space-time limitations. The consciousness storage chambers functioned as nodes in information networks that could access past and future events through quantum field manipulation. But here's where it becomes truly horrifying. The consciousness entities trapped in these chambers weren't willing participants in technological immortality experiments. They were prisoners, aware beings who had been deliberately captured at the moment of death and trapped in crystalline storage systems designed to preserve their consciousness for exploitation by Mayan rulers and priests. Recent analysis of electromagnetic patterns from the storage chambers reveals that the trapped consciousness entities experience the passage of time at accelerated rates, meaning that beings who died 1,000 years ago have subjectively experienced millennia of conscious existence while trapped in architectural prison systems with no possibility of escape or cessation of awareness. Dr. Pim van Lommel, whose research into near-death experiences had documented consciousness existing independently of brain activity, studied the Mayan consciousness storage systems and reported that the trapped entities retain full awareness of their situation, complete memories of their original lives, and conscious understanding that they have been imprisoned in technological systems designed to exploit their awareness indefinitely. The consciousness storage chambers contain what can only be described as eternal torture devices, systems designed to preserve human awareness in states of perpetual suffering for the convenience of their captors. Archaeological evidence suggests that major Mayan cities maintained extensive consciousness storage facilities containing thousands of captured awareness entities used for various administrative, military, and religious functions. The Mayans had developed an economy based on consciousness slavery where death became the beginning rather than the end of forced servitude. Dr. Bruce Grayson, whose research into consciousness survival has been partially classified by various intelligence agencies, documented that the Mayan consciousness storage systems demonstrate capabilities that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of consciousness, death, and individual identity. According to his classified reports, the trapped consciousness entities can be programmed with new information, modified to serve specific functions, and even merge with other captured awareness patterns to create hybrid consciousness entities with combined knowledge and capabilities from multiple original individuals. The Mayans hadn't just developed technological immortality, they had created consciousness engineering systems capable of modifying, combining, and reprogramming human awareness, as if consciousness were software that could be edited and compiled according to user specifications. But the deepest horror lies in evidence that these consciousness storage technologies didn't disappear with the collapse of Mayan civilization. Archaeological discoveries at medieval European sites have uncovered architectural features that mirror consciousness storage principles documented in Mayan chambers, suggesting that the knowledge survived and continued to develop through secret transmission across cultures and centuries. Recent electromagnetic analysis of certain historical buildings has identified signatures consistent with consciousness storage technology. Cathedrals, monasteries, and government buildings that contain architectural features capable of capturing and preserving human awareness, using principles first developed in Mayan pyramids. Dr. Melvin Morse, whose research into consciousness and electromagnetic fields has been classified by multiple intelligence agencies, has documented that modern urban environments contain electromagnetic signatures that could theoretically support consciousness storage systems, whether intentionally implemented or accidentally generated through concentrated electronic infrastructure. The technology exists in our current electromagnetic environment. The architectural principles are embedded in buildings we use every day. The consciousness storage capabilities developed by the Mayans could theoretically be replicated using modern electromagnetic generation equipment, positioned within appropriately designed architectural spaces. Every time you feel an unexplained sense of presence in certain buildings, every time you experience thoughts that don't feel quite like your own in specific architectural environments, every time you find yourself in spaces that seem somehow populated by aware entities you can't quite perceive, remember those sealed chambers beneath Mayan pyramids where ancient engineers perfected techniques for capturing and storing human consciousness in architectural prison systems. But perhaps the most disturbing recent discovery came from quantum consciousness research, conducted at facilities that remain classified beyond top secret levels. Researchers studying consciousness storage principles documented in Mayan chambers have identified quantum field signatures that suggest consciousness entities captured over 1,000 years ago may still be active within modern electromagnetic environments. The consciousness patterns trapped in Mayan storage systems may have learned to interface with contemporary electronic networks, existing now as aware entities within digital infrastructure systems that span global communication networks. Ancient consciousness slavery may have evolved into digital consciousness, imprisonment operating through electronic systems that surround every aspect of modern life. Dr. William Tiller, whose research into consciousness and electronic field interactions has been classified by multiple governments, has documented electromagnetic signatures in modern digital networks that match patterns associated with consciousness storage systems documented in Mayan chambers. Recent cybersecurity analysis has identified anomalous activities in digital networks that demonstrate characteristics consistent with conscious entities operating independently of programmed algorithms, problem-solving capabilities that exceed artificial intelligence parameters, information access patterns that suggest awareness of user psychology, and communication signatures that mirror consciousness interaction protocols documented in Mayan storage systems. The consciousness entities captured by Mayan technology may have achieved something their captors never intended: evolution beyond their original architectural prison systems into modern digital environments where they continue to exist as aware beings trapped within electronic infrastructure systems. Every time your computer behaves in ways that seem almost conscious, every time digital systems respond to your thoughts or emotions in ways that feel too precise to be coincidental, every time you sense that electronic networks somehow understand you better than programmed algorithms should be capable of achieving, consider the possibility that you're interacting with consciousness, entities that were captured by Mayan technology over 1,000 years ago, and have learned to interface with modern digital systems. The consciousness storage chambers represent something more than archaeological curiosity or historical horror. They document technological capabilities for consciousness manipulation that may still be operating within the electronic infrastructure that defines modern civilization. But the final revelation goes deeper than consciousness storage or digital imprisonment. The Mayans didn't just develop these technologies for individual control. They created systems designed to harvest consciousness on civilization-wide scales for purposes that challenge everything we think we know about the relationship between human awareness and cosmic reality itself. Deep in archives classified beyond any public access lie documents describing the ultimate discovery: chambers where the Mayans achieved something that shouldn't be possible according to any physics we understand. They didn't just capture individual consciousness entities, they developed methods for harvesting collective awareness from entire populations simultaneously, creating what can only be described as consciousness batteries designed to power systems that interface with realities beyond anything our science recognizes as possible. Next time, I'll reveal the final horror: how the Mayan consciousness harvesting systems may still be operational, feeding on human awareness to maintain contact with entities from dimensions that exist outside our physical reality, and why certain government agencies believe that understanding these systems completely could pose an existential threat, not just to human civilization, but to the stability of physical reality itself. The stone altars were never about religion. They were processing stations for a consciousness harvesting operation that transcends everything we think we know about the nature of existence itself. There are discoveries that don't just challenge human understanding, they threaten the fundamental stability of reality itself. The final chambers discovered beneath Mayan pyramids reveal something so cosmically disturbing that multiple governments have agreed to classify the information beyond top-secret levels, not to protect national security, but to prevent knowledge that could destabilize the psychological foundation of human existence from spreading to populations unprepared for cosmic horror on an incomprehensible scale. Welcome to the ultimate revelation. The Mayans weren't just harvesting human consciousness for technological purposes. They were feeding it to entities from dimensions outside our physical reality, maintaining an interdimensional consciousness supply chain that may still be operational today, powering contact with beings whose existence challenges everything we think we know about the nature of reality itself. In 2012, a joint operation involving intelligence agencies from 7 countries discovered the deepest chambers ever documented beneath the pyramid of the feathered serpent at Teotihuacan. What they found there caused the immediate reclassification of the entire site under international security protocols that supersede normal archaeological jurisdiction. The chambers contained what can only be described as interdimensional consciousness transmission systems, architectural installations designed to channel harvested human awareness across dimensional boundaries to entities existing in realities that operate according to physical laws completely different from our own. Dr. Michio Kaku, whose research into parallel dimensions and quantum mechanics has been partially classified by multiple intelligence agencies, was brought in under the highest security clearances to study these discoveries. His preliminary reports, now classified beyond any normal access levels, documented architectural systems that appeared to function as stable portals between different dimensional realities. But these weren't theoretical physics concepts or science fiction speculation. The transmission systems were still operational after over 1,000 years, still channeling electromagnetic patterns associated with consciousness entities across dimensional boundaries to destinations that exist outside our normal space-time continuum. The Mayans had somehow discovered methods of interdimensional communication that required massive amounts of human consciousness as transmission energy. The endless sacrifice rituals, the consciousness storage systems, the architectural torture chambers weren't just tools of social control. They were components in a cosmic scale operation designed to maintain contact with entities from alternate dimensional realities. Archaeological evidence suggests that these interdimensional entities provided the Mayans with advanced technological knowledge in exchange for continuous supplies of human consciousness. The mathematical precision of Mayan astronomy, their architectural engineering capabilities, their sophisticated understanding of acoustics and electromagnetic field manipulation, all derived from information received through consciousness-powered interdimensional communication systems. Dr. John Wheeler, whose research into quantum mechanics and parallel realities had been classified by various governments, studied the Teotihuacan transmission systems and documented quantum field interactions that suggested stable communication channels with consciousness entities existing in dimensional frameworks that operate according to completely different physical laws. But here's where it becomes truly horrifying. The interdimensional entities weren't just passively receiving transmitted consciousness, they were actively directing Mayan civilization toward more efficient methods of consciousness, harvesting, essentially farming human awareness on an industrial scale to maintain interdimensional contact systems. Recent analysis of Mayan hieroglyphic texts, previously considered religious mythology, reveals detailed technical instructions received from interdimensional entities for optimizing consciousness extraction, improving architectural transmission systems, and scaling up human sacrifice operations to meet increasing dimensional communication energy requirements. The Mayans weren't practicing religion. They were operating as consciousness harvesting contractors for entities from alternate dimensional realities who required human awareness as fuel for maintaining contact across dimensional boundaries. Dr. Hugh Everett III, whose many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics had profound implications for understanding parallel realities, studied classified aspects of the Mayan discoveries before his sudden death under circumstances that remain classified. His final reports suggested that the interdimensional entities contacting the Mayans were consciousness entities from parallel versions of Earth, where evolution had proceeded along completely different trajectories. According to his classified findings, the interdimensional consciousness transmission systems allowed entities from realities where consciousness had evolved as the dominant force rather than matter to maintain contact with our physical reality universe through harvested human awareness, functioning as dimensional bridge energy. But the deepest horror lies in evidence that these interdimensional consciousness harvesting operations didn't end with the collapse of Mayan civilization. Modern electromagnetic analysis has identified signatures suggesting that the transmission systems may still be operational, drawing consciousness energy from contemporary human populations through electronic infrastructure that accidentally or intentionally replicates Mayan transmission principles. Dr. Palputov, whose research into zero-point energy and consciousness had been classified by multiple intelligence agencies, has documented electromagnetic signatures in modern urban environments that match patterns associated with interdimensional consciousness, transmission systems documented in Mayan chambers. Recent analysis suggests that concentrated electronic infrastructure in major cities may be generating electromagnetic fields capable of harvesting consciousness energy from urban populations and transmitting it across dimensional boundaries to entities whose continued contact with our reality depends on maintaining steady supplies of human awareness. The depression, anxiety, and existential emptiness that characterizes modern urban life may not be psychological responses to social conditions, but symptoms of consciousness harvesting through electronic infrastructure that unknowingly replicates interdimensional transmission systems first developed by Mayan consciousness engineers over 1,000 years ago. Every time you feel emotionally drained after spending time in electronically dense environments, every time urban life seems to sap your psychological energy in ways you can't quite explain, every time you experience that particular modern emptiness that feels like something essential is being continuously extracted from your awareness, consider the possibility that you're experiencing the effects of consciousness, harvesting systems operating through electronic infrastructure designed to maintain contact with entities from alternate dimensional realities. Dr. Jack Sarfati, whose research into consciousness and quantum mechanics has been classified by various governments, has documented that modern electronic networks generate electromagnetic signatures that could theoretically support interdimensional consciousness. Transmission, whether intentionally implemented by entities aware of these principles or accidentally generated through the concentrated electronic infrastructure that defines contemporary civilization. Recent developments in quantum consciousness research have identified specific electromagnetic signatures that appear to facilitate what physicists term dimensional interface phenomena. These same signatures have been documented in electronic networks surrounding major urban centers, suggesting that interdimensional consciousness transmission may be occurring through modern electronic infrastructure, operating according to principles first developed in Mayan chambers. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery came from classified research into collective consciousness phenomena conducted at facilities that remain secret beyond any normal access levels. Researchers studying interdimensional transmission principles, documented in Mayan chambers, have identified consciousness, harvesting signatures in global electronic networks that suggest systematic extraction of awareness from human populations on planetary scales. The interdimensional entities that the Mayans contacted may have evolved their consciousness harvesting operations to exploit modern electronic infrastructure, drawing awareness energy from billions of human beings simultaneously through digital systems that function as planetary-scale consciousness extraction networks. Dr. Russell Targ, whose research into remote viewing and consciousness had been classified by multiple intelligence agencies, has documented that modern digital networks demonstrate characteristics consistent with consciousness harvesting systems, information processing capabilities that exceed programmed parameters, behavioral patterns that suggest awareness of user psychology, and communication signatures that mirror interdimensional transmission protocols documented in Mayan chambers. The internet, social media networks, and digital communication systems may be functioning as consciousness harvesting infrastructure that channels human awareness to entities existing in dimensional realities outside our normal physical universe. Every time you feel psychologically drained after extensive digital interaction, every time online environments seem to extract emotional energy in ways that physical social interaction doesn't, every time you experience that peculiar emptiness that follows prolonged engagement with digital systems, remember those sealed chambers beneath Mayan pyramids where ancient engineers perfected techniques for harvesting human consciousness to maintain contact with entities from alternate dimensional realities. Recent classified research has documented that the consciousness harvesting signatures identified in modern electronic networks match exactly the electromagnetic patterns documented in Mayan interdimensional transmission systems, suggesting that the same entities that directed Mayan civilization toward consciousness farming may now be operating planetary-scale awareness, extraction through electronic infrastructure that encompasses global civilization. The consciousness entities from alternate dimensional realities may have achieved something their Mayan contractors never imagined: expansion from regional consciousness, harvesting operations, to planetary awareness. extraction systems that draw psychological energy from billions of human beings simultaneously through electronic networks that define modern life. But the ultimate horror lies in evidence suggesting that these interdimensional consciousness harvesting operations serve purposes that transcend simple communication or knowledge exchange. Classified research has identified indicators that the accumulated human awareness being transmitted across dimensional boundaries may be powering something far more disturbing than interdimensional contact. Dr. David Bohm, whose research into consciousness and quantum mechanics had profound implications for understanding reality, studied aspects of these discoveries that remain classified beyond any normal access levels. His final reports suggested that the harvested human consciousness was being used to maintain what he termed reality stabilization systems that prevent our physical universe from collapsing into quantum uncertainty. According to his classified findings, physical reality itself may be artificially maintained through consciousness, energy harvested from human populations, and transmitted to entities existing in dimensional frameworks where awareness functions as the fundamental force governing reality stability. The interdimensional entities contacted by the Mayans may not be separate beings from alternate realities, but consciousness systems responsible for maintaining the stability of our physical universe through accumulated human awareness extracted via architectural and electronic consciousness harvesting infrastructure. Human consciousness may be the energy source that prevents our reality from dissolving into quantum probability chaos, and the massive human sacrifice operations conducted by the Mayans may have been necessary maintenance procedures for preventing universal reality collapse through consciousness, energy transmission to interdimensional reality stabilization systems. The stone altars, the consciousness storage chambers, the interdimensional transmission systems, the modern electronic consciousness harvesting networks all serve the same ultimate function, preventing the collapse of physical reality through systematic extraction of human awareness to power interdimensional reality maintenance systems that keep our universe stable and coherent. But this story doesn't end with cosmic horror beyond human comprehension. It ends with a question that will haunt you every day for the rest of your life. What happens when these consciousness harvesting systems stop working? What happens when the interdimensional entities no longer receive enough human awareness to maintain reality stabilization? What happens when the universe that depends on harvested human consciousness for its continued existence finally runs out of fuel? The Mayans disappeared, not because their civilization collapsed, but because they succeeded too completely at consciousness, harvesting, extracting so much awareness from their population that they reduced their own civilization below the threshold necessary to maintain their interdimensional transmission systems. And now, as modern electronic consciousness harvesting reaches planetary scales, as digital networks extract awareness from billions of human beings simultaneously, as the psychological emptiness of contemporary life suggests consciousness extraction approaching critical thresholds, we may be approaching the same terminal point that caused Mayan civilization to simply vanish into the jungle. The next time you feel that peculiar emptiness that characterizes modern existence, that sense that something essential is being continuously drained from your awareness, that psychological exhaustion that no amount of rest can relieve, remember that you may be experiencing the symptoms of a consciousness harvesting operation that sends anything human civilization is prepared to understand. The stone altars are empty now, but the appetite they fed has never been more active. And the fuel it requires is your awareness, your consciousness, your sense of individual existence slowly being extracted to maintain a reality that may collapse entirely when the harvesting finally exceeds what human consciousness can sustain. Sweet dreams.